Dr. Michelle Zeibots now. She's our final speaker and well worth the wait. Michelle is a transport planner specialising in the analysis of sustainable urban passenger transport systems. Her research, consultancy work and teaching draws together operational, behavioural and governance features relating to multimodal urban transport networks. That's a mouthful. I'll hand over to Michelle. Thank you for your patience. As I said, this is... My husband has to fix the screen again. Michelle's our final speaker, but we will have a Q&A session that you can actually ask some questions, and also we'll give you some feedback on how to feedback to the government after Michelle's spoken. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to come along tonight. While we're finding the PowerPoint, yes, I'm a transport planner, yes, I have a PhD in induced traffic growth, but the reason why I have those qualifications is because back in the late 80s, when I was in my early 20s, the RTA built a motorway outside the back of my parents' house, and it changed my life in all sorts of ways. We still to this day have some very significant problems with road traffic noise. What I'm going to do tonight, I have about 20 slides, but they are connected by a story. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and help you enter the wonderful world of strategic transport planning. So if you want to fight against a motorway, you do need to know a little bit about transport. So tonight we have spoken, or we've heard mostly about externalities. What I want to try and do very briefly, and I'm planning to take about 10 minutes so that we can get on with what we have to do. What I want to do tonight is give you some insights into the sorts of things that transport planners think about, or should be thinking about, when they are making decisions about whether or not we should be building a motorway at all. Because I think there are some very significant questions that need to be asked about that. So, to begin with, I want to introduce you to a concept that we call the Moggridge principle. And in transport, when we're talking about motorways and trains and all those different modes, we don't really talk about them in terms of the mode, we talk about them in terms of their operating characteristics. So, one of the things we talk about is the speed, or differences in speeds of different transport elements. So we talk about the fixed speed network, which is the public transport network, because it operates to a timetable. And we talk about the variable speed network, which is the road network. So that speed changes depending on how many people are on the road network. Now the important point here is that the speed of the road network, or the congestion levels on that network, is actually determined by the speed of the public transport network. So the way it works is like this. I'm just going to go off here on a small tangent, but basically this is a shot of Victoria Park in the city, and that's where all of the fixed footpaths are, or the formal footpaths are. There's also some other little elements in this, which are the informal walking paths, and you can see one of them here. So that's, they're often called a goat track. Now the reason why I'm showing you this is because I'm wanting to demonstrate the most important principle in transport planning of all, which is that people always take the quickest route. Okay, so these are shots that I actually use in the slide deck for my students when I'm training transport and traffic engineers. When we're talking about different travel behaviour responses, this is a really important thing. If you understand this, you understand a lot about transport, okay? Now, you all instinctively know that if given this situation here, you would do this too, right? You would, you know that. So let's go back to the Moggridge principle here. So what it basically gets down to is that because most people will take whichever option is quickest, and they're not really all that concerned about whether it's the car, a private car, or the public transport network. They'll go with whichever option is quickest. Because of that, how good your public transport network is in a city is going to determine how good your road network is. But now this is enormously important, and I'll come back to this in a moment, but I wanted to start with this principle. And the reason why is because I believe that you are currently confronted with a choice. You have a choice between this motorway proposal here or this other public transport proposal that has been touted. Now, the point I'm going to get to, in light of what I'd said earlier, is that I think this proposal here is going to have a much more significant impact, a positive impact, on road traffic congestion levels within this sector than what this motorway proposal will. And I also believe that if you love your area, if you care about your children's future, and if you actually want a decent transport network, then you'll put a lot of effort into advocating for this. Now, the other thing that I'd point out is that with a lot of motorway proposals that have gone on over the years, and unfortunately I've been involved with quite a few of them, those communities that succeeded were communities that focused on the positive alternative. And what they did was they turned a dreadful situation into a good situation. They took a proposal like this that they were being confronted by, and they used that as an opportunity to go and get something that they really needed. And I believe that that's what's potentially going on, and it really does depend on what you all want to do and how you want to go about these campaigns. Okay, so why is the government focused on this? So in order to understand this strategically, we need to go back and look at WestConnex, the project that has affected Pauline, who we heard from earlier. So briefly, WestConnex is, it has three parts. WestConnex Stage 1, which is a duplication of the existing M4 motorway, which is the western radial. An extension through here, that's WestConnex Stage 1, then an extension of the existing M5, and this little thing through here, which is called WestConnex Stage 3. Now, there's a hell of a lot that could all be said about this, but what I've tried to do is pick the eyes out of the really critical component in this in order to explain some other motorway development that's been proposed. So that's WestConnex Stage 3 there. This is a diagram that shows you the off-ramps that are being built as part of WestConnex Stage 3 that are meant to be the off-ramp for your motorway, the Western Harbour Tunnel. This is what a part of WestConnex Stage 3 looks like with the inclusion of the off-ramps for the Western Harbour Tunnel. This is what it looks like without. So there's been a lot of discussion about the complexity of that motorway interchange, all of which is supposed to be underground. Now the critical part with WestConnex Stage 3 is actually this little bit down here, the orange bit. So if we go back to this one here, what I want to focus on now is this coming down through here, all right? And in particular, I want to focus on the traffic volumes that are expected in that tunnel section. Now, I've tried to keep it very, very brief so we can get through this quickly. But basically what this shows, and it took me a long time to find this in the EIS, but what it shows is that the expected traffic volumes in Stage 3, they are expected to be about 1/3 of the ceiling capacity of those tunnel sections 10 years after it's opened. All right, let's go over that again. What does that mean? Basically, all roads have what we call a ceiling capacity. There is a maximum volume of traffic that can fit in a road or per lane. And what we have is we have these what we call level of service, and you'll see this criteria come up in EISs and the documentation that you have. And it basically works like this. It's quite simple. There's a scale that goes from A to F. A is free-flowing traffic. It's all lovely. The volumes are not very heavy. As the volumes increase, we get to what we call level of service E, and level of service E is the ceiling capacity. Now, in transport, we have these things called the Highway Capacity Manual, and they have numbers. I've not included it here because I wanted to keep things brief. But the maximum volume of traffic that you can fit through a motorway lane per hour is about 2,000 vehicles per hour. All right. So if we go back, to here, what we can see is that in that 8-lane tunnel, 4 lanes in each direction of WestConnex Stage 3, we're getting volumes in 2 directions that are under 6,000 vehicles per hour. So if I think of 6,000 vehicles per hour in a tunnel that has a total capacity of potentially 16,000 vehicles per hour, 6,000 is a hell of a lot less than 16,000. All right, so when I go and look at this, I can see that they are not expecting a lot of traffic in that tunnel. We're looking at another cross-city tunnel. Now you might think, well, hang on a minute, what? This is not an outcome that you want to tell everybody about, right? It's not how you sell a motorway. It doesn't look good in the business case. It means that you can't really justify it. So what I'm suggesting here, or I'm not really suggesting, I'm saying quite clearly, that the reason why they want to build this is because they need to pump this piece of the motorway network up with more traffic. And what they want to do is they want to use the Western Harbour Tunnel as a means of pumping and generating more traffic in order to generate this other motorway that they've built. So they're in a bit of a pickle, right? They're in a bit of a pickle, and basically that I think you'll find is the raison d'etre behind your motorway. And I think it's also the raison d'etre behind, if we go back to this one as well, it's also the raison d'etre behind this motorway down here, which is the F6. A quick story, I come from this part of the Sydney, I come from the Shire, and I spent about 2 years of my life trying to stop that motorway back in the early 2000s, and we were successful. We got the Cronulla rail line duplicated instead. And when I was working with friends here over the M5, we got the airport rail link built. And that wouldn't have happened if we had not intervened in the way that we did. We also got the Walleye Creek station added. That was another couple of years of work. And then some other bits and pieces here and there. The point I'm saying is that if you want to, you can use these opportunities to get something that you actually need, that your community needs. But the other problem from my perspective is that these motorways do tend to come back. Some of them you can stop. But anyway, all right. So that I think is what's really going on. I think that's the strategic agenda. So if I cast my strategic transport planner's eye over this, that makes sense. It's not a good thing to make sense over, but I really do believe that that's what's going on here. Okay, so there's that and that. Let's have a look at some other quick bits of data. So I'm going to try and skip over this. A colleague of mine, Paul Vandenbos, did some modelling. Some very, very simple modelling. What we did was we looked at, we did what we call a select link plot. And we in particular wanted to look at what the volumes at the Spit Bridge, Warringah Road and Monavale roads were. And we pulled out the numbers for that. So here they are. These are the 2-hour AM peak volume, traffic volume numbers. These are for both directions. And these are the numbers that are going through those 3 links. Now they're very important because they are the roads that the traffic would reassign from and go into the motorway tunnel, given the traffic volumes that are on the network at the moment. Now what it shows is that of that total of 20,000, around 4,000, according to the model that we have, around about 4,500 vehicle movements for that 2-hour period, or 22% of that total, are vehicles that are currently, they have destinations that would use the Sydney Harbour bridge or the tunnel in order to cross the harbour. Now that's significant because that is potentially the traffic that would reassign into the Western Harbour Tunnel, we think. Okay? Now, if we go back to our ceiling capacity calculations, I can only get about 1 lane's worth of traffic out of that. So in other words, for the sake of 1 lane of traffic, we're looking at building that Western Harbour Tunnel. This is the main raison d'etre. So once again, the difficulties that I'm coming up with is that if we look at existing numbers, I'm not seeing justification. I'm not seeing enough traffic in the existing situation in order to justify that motorway. Now there's a few things that come out of this. What it's showing is that the majority of the traffic is local traffic. So if you build this motorway, will a lot of your local traffic just go away and disappear? No, I don't think it will, and we need to be realistic about that. So you're not going to get the sorts of traffic reassignment, as we call it, whereby traffic goes from the surface roads into the tunnel or into another route. I don't think we're going to get the sorts of volumes or the sorts of traffic reassignment that would make the existing problems on the surface road network go away. Okay, that's point number 1. Point number 2, when we build motorways, yes, they do generate more traffic. And I think in this area, the likelihood of generating more traffic is actually quite high. And the reason why is because these networks are fairly saturated. If you were to add more motorway capacity, you would then create an opportunity for more travel. So there's a lot of different sorts of system feedback going on here, and it is quite difficult to keep tabs on all of that. So it might sound as I'm saying contradictory things at times, but I'm not. But I think what would happen is that in order to make use of that road space, you'd be generating a lot of additional traffic. So there's a question for you. Is that really what you want to do? Is that strategically what you want to achieve? That's point number 2. Point number 3, this motorway would have a toll on it. So the toll would also act as a deterrent to inducing greater traffic growth, which if you're a tollway company, that's not what you really want to hear. But it would also act as a deterrent for people to transfer into the motorway and off your surface roads. So once again, are you going to see big improvements in your surface road traffic? I don't think this is the way in which you do that or achieve that. Which brings us back to the other point, and that is, what would be achieved with a public transport network instead. All right, these are a couple of shots from New South Wales Planning rather than the Transport for New South Wales. So in Sydney, we talk about the global economic arc, which is this piece of Sydney through here. It's enormously important because most of the city's GDP is generated in this spot here in Sydney, St Leonard's, Chatswood and Macquarie Park. So, and North Sydney. So in the Sydney CBD, that generates 8% of the country's entire GDP. It's a very important patch of turf. I could talk about those at some length, but I won't. But the point I want to make is that strategically, from a strategic transport planning perspective, what Sydney planners have always wanted is to see another CBD at Parramatta. Okay? We've been talking about that for decades. Now, the point I would make is that these sorts of centres, they occur on very particular parts of the transport network. They occur where there is good rail access. All right, and the reason why that is there and not out there is because this is the operational centre of Sydney, because that is where the rail network is focused. If you want to have another CBD out here, you need to give this a rail network in order to focus the development in that way, and also so that you are able to offer businesses that might locate there the opportunity to see the entire region as a catchment for their labour force. If I'm a business and I locate here, I've got a rail network that I know is going to enable me to access most of the Sydney metropolitan labour force. That's why I locate there. I don't locate out at Minto because I can't access all of the people with all those wonderful skills that I need. Similarly, I'm not as inclined to locate in Parramatta because there isn't the rail network to feed large volumes of people into that area. So why is that important? If you are really wanting to build CBD there, what you'd want to do is connect this up with this part through here. And what you would also want to do is bring in these centres here, and oh, look, they're your centres. And at the moment, they are not connected through to that area. So one of the points that I would make is that if your heart was in the west of Sydney, ironically, one of the best things that you could do in order to help develop the Parramatta CBD would be to build some rail links out here. Now that's counterintuitive. It doesn't, come across as an obvious thing to do. But in order to get that to develop in the way that you would like it to, you actually need to put these links in here, and I think it includes this link there. That's important because there's an argument. You need to be able to justify, from a strategic perspective, why it is that you might want to have that rail line. Now, maybe you don't want that rail line, but I'd like to suggest that that would be worth fighting for all sorts of reasons. Now,
excuse me, but
yes.
They're putting 3 lanes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why are they putting 3 lanes?
With WestConnex, with WestConnex Stage 3, to me that would make, it doesn't make sense, but it would make sense from their perspective, and I don't think like them. But it would make more sense to have 2 lanes in each direction, not 4 lanes in each direction. But I gather that there was one of the ministers at the time said, oh, it should be 4 lanes, and so therefore it was. So there, in amongst all of this, there has been decisions, very critical decisions, that have been not made on technical basis, they've been made on the basis of feel and what have you. There's, and I understand that, but I do believe, however, that, whilst we need to be respectful of ministers, they are not transport experts, and really a lot of the decisions that are made about transport are quite often that you have strategic experts that are being overruled constantly by elected politicians, and it's not always a good thing. I don't think I've answered that very well, but
political consideration.
Yeah. I was on the expert advisory panel for the New South Wales Transport Master Plan, and very briefly, after a year of sitting there with people like Ron Christie, Les Wallinger, the then Director of the Transport for New South Wales, we spent a year talking about rail and public transport improvements. This was in the very, very early days of the Berejiklian Transport Ministry. And they were halcyon days because all of the discussion was about improving Sydney's public transport network. Then we were shown the New South Wales Transport Master Plan, and had just about every motorway that had ever been thought of by anyone since 1948 stuck into it. And I gather that happened because of the influence of Infrastructure New South Wales that was headed up by Nick Reiner at that time. Okay, so, all right, very quickly. If we look at the area through here, this is the Northern Beaches. It doesn't have a rail link. This is an area that does, this is North Sydney, and it does have a rail link. What we see is that the number of people driving cars in order to get to work in Pittwater, Warringah and all that area is much higher, that's the red areas, than the areas that have a rail link. This is really obvious stuff, but the point is that it goes back to that first point. It's not that people in these areas love their cars. It's not that they're wedded to their cars. It's because they don't have an option. They don't have a decent public transport option. And that's why you see these big significant differences in mode splits. If we look at it again, look at this. This is walking and cycling. That's huge. That's in North Sydney. Mossman, really interesting. Once again, high levels of car use, much higher levels of public transport use. A rail link makes a big difference. People do use it. This is another version. These are people who are going to Chatswood. Once again, Pittwater and Warringah. Most people are going to Chatswood, that centre, by car. If this was in place, we'd be seeing some very different outcomes. So, the key points are there. The main one is that I think that this needs to be a priority. There needs to be investigation of mass transit or significant public transport options. From what I understand, the usage of B-line services has been quite significant, but that is not a substantial mass transit link in my view. I'm going to end there, but I wish you all the very best of luck. This is a very difficult time for folks, as Pauline's experience would show you. But I really do think that when you are handed a motorway option, you need to take control of the situation by talking very clearly and unambiguously about what it is that you want instead, and that's the only way in which you're going to stop stacks and a whole raft of other problems.